I began, well, I kept pursuing the midwifery in whichever ways I could. So it was purchasing books, and I read all kinds of things. I started going to some conferences. Then I got pregnant with your sister, Aura, and I found a midwife, although I did find a midwife I was planning to have a home birth, and early into the pregnancy, like around 12 weeks, I started bleeding and ended up in hospital, only to find that I was pregnant with twins. So, and I did in fact lose one of the twins. I was in the hospital for about 5 days while they were trying to figure out what was going on, because I was bleeding so badly and they just really couldn't figure it out. And then it was discovered that I was miscarrying a twin. So then it seemed like, okay, so my plans for a home birth are now tabled, because nobody really knew what kind of problems I might have because of that pregnancy. So I went along with the pregnancy. I kept the midwife, and towards the end of the pregnancy, the obstetrician I was seeing basically announced to me, well, I'm going on vacation, so I'm going to leave you in the care of this particular doctor, a doctor who I wasn't interested in being cared for by, and all my plans that I had made with this obstetrician, it seemed like, well, now what? Because he was going to be on vacation, and so whoever was caring for me, I hadn't made any plans with them. I knew he had a very high rate of cesarean section, so I thought, I just really don't want to see him. So I began searching my soul, I guess, about what is it you really need to do here. And I ended up reading this book called Immaculate Deception by Suzanne Arms, and it was clear to me right away that I do not want to be in the hospital. No one can give me any real advice on what this pregnancy might mean, but I thought, no, I'm not doing it. I'm going to stay at home. So I had to look for a doctor who would be supportive, and lo and behold, I found one out in the country. We lived in Ontario at the time, and it was just an old country doctor who agreed to take me on. I think I was due in like 4 or 5 weeks. And he said, okay, well, you have a midwife, so that's good, because then, someone can be there with you, because I won't be there the whole time. And, and anyway, I ended up having a home birth, and he did come out. He arrived just in time for the birth. And it was just a really nice experience, just with family. Your grandmother was there. Your sister Leela she attended. She was pretty bored with the whole labor process because she was only 4 years old at the time, but she was very excited when her sister began being born, and she was a totally devoted, loving sister with her new sibling. And I kept pursuing my interests, and again, reading everything I could. Workshops began becoming available. They were mostly American midwives that were coming in and sharing their knowledge. So I participated in those. I began teaching classes, and the owner of Informed Birth and Parenting, Rahima Baldwin, asked me if I'd be interested in becoming a trainer for other women wanting to become childbirth educators. So I did that, and started doing just probably a couple a year training workshops, and while I still pursued my interests. And I did also find a midwife to apprentice with. Your sister Aura was about a year old when I began doing that. And I drive 70 miles one way to go and attend clinics so that I could learn about giving prenatal care. And soon, very, very soon, I was invited to birth by the women who were coming there for their prenatal care. And the midwife that I was learning from didn't have any assistant, so I ended up becoming her assistant and apprenticed for, a good couple of years, going to birth, probably doing 30 births a year, and learning a ton of things. And it's always stayed with me, that whole experience, because we were providing care for women wanting home births, and there were a lot of women wanting that, and very, very few of them ended up in hospital because things just weren't going as smoothly as they needed to go. But everybody else successfully gave birth at home, and it's just, I can look back on it now and I think it's really quite remarkable, because all the talk about, well, we have to be really cautious and safe and putting all these things in place, and I just look back and I think, yeah, the babies weren't dropping dead while we were delivering them. In fact, there's one death that I do recall. It was early in my apprenticeship, and we lost, we couldn't hear the fetal heart at a certain point. It just suddenly wasn't there. And so we sent her into hospital, and the baby had died. And an autopsy was performed against the parents' wishes. It was against their religious beliefs, but because it was a home birth, it was forced upon them. It was like this, they're going to find a reason and I think they were hopeful that it would be the midwife's fault that this happened. Anyway, the findings were that this baby was microcephalic. That means the structure of the head was very, very small, so the brain hadn't developed normally. And the coroner concluded that this baby, in this particular instance, was not compatible with life because of the abnormality that had occurred during the pregnancy. And, we don't know why. I'm going back at least 35 years. We don't know why that happened. It might have been some kind of virus that occurred early in the pregnancy. But even with the autopsy, all they could see was that the brain had definitely not developed properly because of the cranium that just was abnormal. And that's really, and I think about all these births and and we had very little equipment. We did carry oxygen, but we didn't have an ambibag, which is something you'd use for ventilating the baby if it wasn't breathing properly or breathing at all. But we just didn't have situations where babies needed anything. They just came out, they cried, or they came out and made a little noise, and then were quite content. We always put them onto the mother's chest and got them breastfeeding quite soon after they were born, and things went quite well. And one of the births we had, again, early in my apprenticeship, was a twin birth, which we had no idea she had twins. We certainly weren't doing ultrasounds then, that at the rate they're done now. I mean, almost every woman now has an ultrasound. But we weren't doing ultrasounds then. That was not a normal routine. So these twins went undiscovered, her first baby had been quite small, what you'd consider small for its gestational age when it was born. So this next pregnancy, where we'd been talking to her a lot about eating really well during her pregnancy, and we're trying to get her to grow a bigger baby. So they actually just, with the way they're sitting, they felt like one decent sized baby. And when she gave birth, the day she gave birth, the first baby was born. I was doing the catching, and that first baby was born, and just thick dark meconium poured out with it with the waters, and so that baby was brought up. She was actually sitting between two chairs, so she was upright. Brought the baby up over her thigh. Or just suctioning, trying to get rid of that meconium. Two little bitty feet, yes. These two tiny, tiny little feet were emerging. And I called to the midwife who was on the other side. I said, "Come here, come and look." And she nearly had a heart attack when she saw these feet. And she's, "Oh my." And the mother's going, "What is it? Is it twins? I'm going to have to get another crib." That's all she could think. Oh, God. So anyway, this tiny little baby came out without any real difficulty and breathed right away. And the end result was I think the first baby that was born was 5 pounds 11 ounces. And the second baby was only 4 pounds, I'm trying to remember, 4 pounds 2 ounces, really small. So there might have even been some twin-to-twin transfusion just because of the discrepancy and so different in size. And yet these babies did fine. They both got to the breastfed fine, and we kind of just sat back and went, "Oh, God." But it's, it just it was a constant reminder to me, birth is normal. Birth is normal, especially when you don't interfere with it. It's almost always normal. Anyway, my apprenticeship went along, as I say, for a couple of years. And then I started getting people calling me about wanting to have a home birth. So I actually began taking some women on, and so I was doing births out in my area, still driving out the 70 miles out to, there was a Kitchener. We did births in Kitchener and Guelph and Shakespeare, oh gosh, all over the place. And I also continue to teach classes and teach the occasional workshop for those women who were studying to become a childbirth educator. So during all this time too, we also had meetings that we went to every month. They were peer review meetings. So we would get together with all the midwives in the general area and discuss issues that were coming up. We would discuss cases that had been unusual, so that it's a learning forum, but it's also if you had a difficult pregnancy that you were grappling with and not sure what to do, you discuss those things because a more experienced midwife might have more advice or suggestions. And also during this time, there was a move on to formalize the profession of midwives in Canada. Well, certainly in Ontario at that time. So this was all going on at the same time, and it was just a busy, busy time. And we had a group start that was called the Midwifery Task Force, made of consumers, who were helping by talking about their own stories, and some of these women had good, or I guess, an expertise in lobbying. So, and we had a few lawyers that had been clients who got involved, and the whole thing started to move ahead towards regulation of midwifery in Canada. I say Canada because it was a Canadian thing, but it was, midwifery was first regulated in Ontario in 1994, and that was the first time in Canadian history that midwifery had been recognized. So we were the last industrialized country in the world to recognize the profession of midwifery. And that, as I say, came in 1994. And they're going strong in Ontario. I think they now have, we started with 65 midwives. They're now, this is now getting on to 27 years, I think. No, more than that, 1994, 2020, 26 years of regulation. And there are over 2,000 midwives in Ontario. Here in Nova Scotia, we've been at this for just over 10 years now, and we still only have 11 funded positions for midwives in this province. So it's only in 3 sites where women can actually get a midwife. Without the funding, it's just impossible to be a midwife, because now you have to have malpractice insurance, which you'd have to pay for yourself. So it's just undoable. Anyway, I moved ahead a bit there, I think, going back to the whole process around regulation. There was, they decided to do an assessment program, a short assessment program of the current midwives, to really see what kind of skills they did have and where they might have weaknesses that needed to be addressed before they could be licensed. So this was all prior to the regulation. Tried to get it all done so that they would all be ready to be licensed when the regulation was passed and starting to be implemented. So the whole idea behind that, and that was a program run at the Michener Institute in Toronto. So you had to apply to be assessed, and I got turned down. So I appealed, and I still got turned down, and I just couldn't get my head around it. It's like, why can't I get into this? And in the meanwhile, I saw this program being advertised in one of my midwifery magazines, and it was called the Russian Birth Project. And it was very intriguing to me, partly because I had, for whatever reason, had a great interest in Russia and its history. But this opportunity presented itself where I could go to Russia, and it was like a 4-month internship there, and study there, and do a lot of births there, and do some high-risk births as well. So I ended up doing that. And while I was there, they started asking for... No, sorry, before I left, they had, here in Toronto, they had started requesting applications for the university program, which was a 4-year program to study midwifery and become licensed through that channel. So I applied for that before I left. And while I was in Russia, I was asked to do an interview, and they wanted me to come back, which Russia, and that was 1993. Russia in 1993 was not a place you could just come and go from. You had to have visas. And the visas had dates on them. So dates of when you could enter the country and dates when you had to leave the country. And so in order to leave and go back to do the interview, I had to apply for another visa. So I started that process. And in the meanwhile, my husband at the time spent a lot of time talking to them where they were setting up this university program, and finally convinced them to let me do my interview by phone in Russia. And that's what I did. I did my interview, and I was accepted into the program. So when I got back from Russia, which was in July, no, it was in June, and we began the university program in August. So it was August 1993 when I began my studies. It was a Bachelor of Health Science that I was doing, specializing in midwifery. And yeah, that's where my formal education began. And that's probably a whole other story to talk about, is the whole educational process.